Okay guys, as you can see here, I've finished doing the overbinds on the one that we showed a little bit earlier. All the guides have been bound into place and I've done an alignment on them. You can pick whichever way you want to align the guides. So at any rate, to summarise what we've done here and what we've got here, all the underbinds were done earlier, and then I've done a full coat of epoxy over the binds and the rod blank, and again, that's your choice. You can coat just the underbinds if you like. I like to coat the whole rod, especially with a game rod. I'd rather scratch the epoxy than the blank, so that's just my method of doing a game rod. So what we're going to do now is we're going to apply the first coat, or first top coat of finish, and this will be one of 3 or 4. It's hard to judge, but what we're going to try and achieve by the end of it is that we have all of the bindings completely covered with epoxy and a nice smooth finish. So we'll get on and we'll put the first coat on there. So I've got it set up in the lathe so it'll still spin as if I was doing some binding, and I like to start at the tip end and I'll spin it on up to, it allows you to cut the edge in nice and neat against the tip, and then okay, so once I've got to that point, I'll just take the belt off the so it's easy to turn, take the belt off the lathe so it's easy to turn, and then I'll coat long ways down the blank. You don't want to put too much on for your first coat. You'll wind up, if you put too much in there, you'll wind up getting bubbles in around the guide feet, and it'll look like shit, and it won't perform as well as what you'd like it to do. So all we're wanting to do is drench the bindings themselves so that the epoxy will go through the bindings and adhere itself to the guide feet. So we're just doing a nice light little coat. Try not to get too much build up on the inside of the guide foot, because you'll create a crack point there if you get too much. The rod blank will bend a lot more than what the epoxy will, especially if you do a massive big build up in there, so I try and brush it away from in there. Remember, we're putting 3 or 4 coats on this, so if we're a little bit shy on it, just the first couple of coats, we can add a bit more on the second and third coats. It's quite warm here today, so I've got to work fairly quickly with this. Generally I'd be a little bit slower, but always remember, if it starts to get a little bit heavy, the finish coat, just stop and go and mix yourself up another batch. You don't want to apply it when it gets like jam, because it won't do the job it was intended to do, which is to soak through the bindings and adhere the guides. I'm using quite a small brush here because the diameter of the rod's not that great, so I'll change over. I normally have a couple of brushes on standby. Once I get a bit further down the thicker end of the rod, I'll use a bigger brush so that I can apply it a little quicker. You want to try and, once you get it covered, you want to try and do some nice long strokes to even it all out. You're getting a couple of little bubbles in there when you're applying it. Don't worry too much about that, because we'll add some heat to it when we get near the end of it, and release all of those bubbles out. So again, we're just going around the inside of the foot, just wiping a very light coat in there, more or less just trying to seal it, if you like. So remember these long strokes in between, try and keep it, make it like a glass finish. And you're not going to achieve that on your bindings on your first coat. You're still going to see some thread poking through, little ridges of thread. And that's what you want to achieve as well. You don't want to try and completely fill the bindings with your first coat. You want to probably try and achieve that on your second or third coat. And if you can achieve that, say, on your second coat, then your third coat you can get that really nice and smooth, make a lovely transition all the way down the rod blank. Makes it look like a professional did it, even if he didn't. I'll change the brush now. Getting a bit thicker down this end, so I've moved up to I think it's about 3/8 in width. But I'll keep that small brush handy for when I'm going around the inside of the guide feet here. I'm just using this for the bulk part of the rod. Make sure that you look at it good, and make sure that you get the full cover across the blank, so you haven't got little gaps and bits missing out of it. Alright, so I'll change the brush again, get around these feet here. And again, we'll do these long strokes where we can. Try and make it as nice and smooth as we can. Okay, so obviously I've got a set of rollers there. I'll come back to that bit in a minute. Firstly, I'll go and get it around this guide here. Right, this stuff's starting to get a little bit thick and heavy, so I'll just finish this little side here, and I'll go and mix up another pot. Unfortunately, we've picked the hottest day of the year so far to jam this on. I think it's about 38 degrees in this shed at the moment, so my working time is not that great. Alright, what I'm going to do is, while I'm mixing up another pot, I'm just going to put it onto the drying mode on the lathe, let that turn for a bit. I'll mix up another pot and we'll finish these last couple of sections here. Righto, I've mixed up my other pot of epoxy here, so I'll carry on and finish this little bit off. So I think what I'll do is I'll show you what I'm trying to achieve in this guide foot here, because it's a bit bigger and you might be able to see a bit better on the video. So pretty much I'm wiping the epoxy in the center of it and working from the center to the edges, and I'm just trying to let a little bit of it wipe in underneath the guide foot, and then same on the back side like that. And I'll just let it run its way in there without sort of loading it up. You just want to give it a helping hand and sort of give it a bit of direction on where you want it to go. Try and keep it as thin as you can for the initial coat. I've explained that already, but it's fairly important. You don't want too much. If you can see in there, I've got a nice little line of epoxy that's sealed between the underbind and the guide foot itself, but there's no great big build up or wedge of epoxy in there. It'll build up slowly in time when we get to the second, third and sometimes fourth coat. Probably only 3 coats on this one. It's only a light, small little rod, but if we're up building a 37 or a 60 kilo chair rod or something like that, we're probably up around the 6 to 9 coats. It's better to do many light coats than it is to try and do a couple of big heavy coats, because all you're going to do is get micro bubbles in there, going to look like shit. So you're better off going this way. Well, that's what I've found in my many years of building game rods. Again, this is only a guide. You guys have probably got your own methods, and for some years that haven't built a rod before, I really hope that you find some of these tips helpful for you. This is exactly how I build game rods for whoever, whichever customer it might be. I've got my methods of doing it, and I very rarely move away from those methods. About the only thing I ever do is change the colour of the bindings. So. Okay, so again the long strokes to even it all out, and then I'm going to put it back onto the lathe mode here, so I'll spin the finish on to the ramps, which will allow me to cut the edges in up the top here at the back of the bindings. So got to change my belt over, that'll help. Alright, so okay, you don't want to spin it too fast, because the epoxy will build up and start flying off everywhere. So just a nice gentle speed. And again, all we're trying to achieve here is just allow the epoxy to soak into the bindings. We don't need to create that nice smooth glassy finish on our first coat. That all comes in time. So try and keep your coat as even as you can, and then over the over the back of it, I'll just dab a little bit on the top, and I create that little line in front of my brush and just keep working it down to the edge of where the epoxy was on the first occasion. Okay, and all smoothed off. And again, over the back we do the same, pretty much in reverse. So I'll build it up down here at the bottom, and then I'll use the excess with the edge of my brush and try and get a nice straight edge on it. That looks pretty good. And then work it up the bindings. I'm using a high build epoxy here too, so I'm not going to tell you that you should use a high build or a low build or whatever. That's entirely up to you. There's probably a totally different technique with the application of the two. I'm used to using high build. I just put it on fairly thin and a lot of coats to achieve the smooth finish that I get. Okay, so last thing I've got left to do is just to fill this little gap in where the support was. I've got it supported down the other end on the tube of the tip, so it's not going to go anywhere. I don't need to spin it anymore, so I'm just going to put it on longitudinally like I was doing before, so just to fill this little gap in. And again, once we've got it completely covered, then we'll just go around it once or twice and do our long, smooth, even strokes to try and even it all out. And you probably, I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but I'm incorporating a few bubbles into it, but we'll get rid of those in a second. So okay, there we go. That's pretty much us. We've got that sorted right. So again, for the moment, I'll put it on the drying mode with the lathe, my beautiful Alps lathe here that I've had for about 10 years. Must have built over 1,000 rods on this lathe, and it's still going strong. So okay, so the next step is that we're going to apply some heat to this epoxy to take out any little micro bubbles and try and smooth it out a little bit, let it run and flow a little bit better. I've been doing this a long time and I use MAP gas to do it with, but you have to be very, very careful with the MAP gas because it burns fairly hot. For the beginner, I'd suggest probably go to a heat gun or something like that, a hairdryer or whatever, or a light alcohol torch or something like that you could just wave the flame underneath it. But because I build so many, I need to move on, get this one cleared up into the drying rack and then move on to the next rod. So I use this, and I don't spend a lot of time with it, and I keep it moving at all times, and I do it while it's under rotation. So as you can see, I'm just waving it over the edge of the epoxy. That is plenty to get rid of the bubbles the way I'm doing it here. I'll up and down the rod about a dozen times, but moving and moving very quickly with it. I'll give a little bit on this back ramp here. You'll see I've got a few little prickles in here. That's pretty much come from the burnishing of the cotton. It's probably frayed the edges a little bit, but that's okay. I don't worry too much about that because I'll let that dry, and we can take all those little prickles out with a razor blade, and the second coat will completely cover them all. Alright, so I'll just have a quick inspection along the rod and make sure that I haven't missed any bits and pieces. I can see my thread poking through the epoxy in places, especially up near the top of the guide foot. That's fine, that's what I want to see. I've got a little bubble here, I'll just get rid of that. Okay, that's gone. And I can see the threads poking through pretty much everywhere. That's fine. Second and third coat gets rid of all of that, but I know that I've achieved what I wanted to do, was to sweat the epoxy through the bindings to gather around the foot of the guide and help glue it in position so it's there forever. Alright guys, look, that's a basic way of building a game rod. There's many and very different techniques and methods that you can use. What I've showed you is my method and how I do it, and hopefully you can get something out of this and go ahead and build yourself a game rod. Have a whole lot of fun building a rod for yourself, taking it out and catching a fish with it. It's a whole lot of fun. Be very careful though, it becomes addictive. Okay guys, thanks for watching, and catch up with you next time.